Hello and welcome to this video where the subject is cropping in Adobe Camera Raw and also Photoshop. My name's Barry Beckham. So the obvious first question may be, should we do our cropping in Adobe Camera Raw or in Photoshop? It's a simple question, but sometimes even simple questions have a habit of drifting into complicated answers. So let me try and give a couple of practical reasons why we may choose Photoshop over Adobe Camera Raw to do the cropping of our images. If I were using Adobe Camera Raw to batch process a number of raw images, or in fact I could also use Bridge for this purpose too, then I'd probably leave the cropping until the images were open in Photoshop. Batch processing suggests that we're not likely to be doing detailed editing on each image individually. If we were, then we probably wouldn't be using a batch process in the first place. So in this scenario, it may be a choice to crop in Photoshop once all of the batch processing has been completed. But if we were about to edit just one image to a much higher standard in Adobe Camera Raw, then perhaps we would choose to crop within Adobe Camera Raw if in fact a crop was necessary. My reason is there's very little point in taking the time and trouble within Adobe Camera Raw to edit parts of an image that we may later remove via a crop in Photoshop. With a detailed one image manipulation, I would always crop in RAW because quality editing almost always requires some work around the edges of the image. So we need to know where that edge is going to be as we make those editing changes. One thing we need to keep in mind is any crop we make in Adobe Camera Raw isn't permanent. We can always make further changes later, or even change our mind completely and abandon any crop we've made. It's one of the good parts of shooting and editing raw images. Now we may crop images for a number of different reasons, but probably one of the most important ones is to improve the composition, to give the image more visual impact. For example, sometimes we may wish to make more of a landscape format, but that too is generally aimed at improving the composition. Cropping from the edge of an image to remove distractions is also something we may feel the need to do. But these days we do need to bear in mind that we can often do this without making a crop, using tools in Photoshop like the ContentAware tools, and we'll take a look at those a little later. So here we have an image directly from a digital SLR. It's untouched, it's not been edited at all, and it certainly hasn't been cropped. The crop tool we'll find at the top of the screen to the left of center of the group you can see there. I can select it with the mouse of course, but I can also use the C key to select the crop, and I can just click and drag and away we go. Escape will always take you away and give you another shot at it. What I'm going to suggest we do is to click and hold on the tool icon. Can you see that little marker at the bottom there? That's telling us that there's other tools within there. So we need to get to those because I'm going to click and hold and suggest that one thing that's worth having is the overlay. I'm going to suggest we turn it on and we leave it on, because then when I make a selection with my crop, I can see the rule of thirds. They're going to help me to crop my image, especially when I have composition in mind. So anytime I click and drag with my crop, if before I commit that crop I want to make changes to it, you can see I've got toggles all over the place where I can do so. So I can make minute adjustments and get exactly what I want. I can even rotate the image if I needed to. Once I'm happy with that, and if I wanted to carry on with further manipulations of this image, then I can commit that crop by touching the Enter key. But it's never cast in stone. If I wanted to come back out, make a change or abandon that crop entirely, all I need to do is to go back to my crop tool and select it. The crop reappears, I hit the escape key, and there we are, back to where we started. Now you may have noticed that when I went to the crop tool and clicked and held, we do have a series of presets. So if we've got a specific project we're working on that demands we create a picture which is square, then we may want to select the one-to-one. We've got all sorts of other options here. I'm not entirely sure why Adobe tends to reverse these figures, because we do tend to say 3:2, 4:3, 5:4, 7:5 and 16:9, but I think you get the drift. So if we had a special project, maybe making a slideshow, which would be a good project for 16:9, then if I select that and click and drag, what you'll notice is we lose the toggles in the middle portions, because we now don't have the opportunity to drag the crop down, because it has to maintain the 16:9 aspect ratio that we've set in the parameters. But of course, same as usual, hit the enter key to commit it. I'll touch the C key to select the crop automatically with just the keyboard, and escape, and I'm back out to where we started. Now I'm going to go back to my crop tool here, click and hold. I'm going to put it back to normal, but you will notice down here you do have a custom option. That option is to create a custom aspect ratio, something that you can add to these. I've never found the need to do that. I've never had a project where I've needed to consider that, but I'm sure there must be some. All I'm going to do next, I think, is to go back to the normal setting, and we'll just go through the process of cropping the image. If I click and drag, I'm going to get that rule of thirds, and I can see I've got a pretty strong diagonal composition here, crossing the strong points of the rule of thirds, so it's looking pretty good. I could, as I demonstrated a little while ago, as long as we stay within the boundaries of the image, I can rotate, but as I rotate you'll notice that the picture will get smaller because it's restricted to the edge of the image. But there are times when it's quite useful to do that, to give a slightly different angle to a flying bird, or even a still life, or maybe even something you've shot in the city. But let's just pick a small turn for this one. I don't think we need too much, but a little bit maybe. I've got the wings going through. I think I'll come down just a little bit more there, because we don't need too much of that. Sky, maybe a little less at the back, so we've got the bird with a bit more space in front than behind. Then I can hit the enter key and continue with the manipulation, and you can see what I mean about the reasons for doing so in Adobe Camera Raw. Because if I wanted to slightly darken the edges of this image, I now know where the edges are going to be. So you can see that if I did want to darken down any detail around the edges, not entirely appropriate when we've got this plain sky, but I'm sure you can imagine many other scenarios when we may need to do that. Well, it wouldn't make sense to do it, open the image into Photoshop and then trim off the edges. So here we're working on the image just as we want it. So within Adobe Camera Raw there's not a great deal more I think you can say about the crop tool. We generally use it to improve composition, but not always. But the benefits of working in RAW, of course, is that any time I can touch that crop tool or hit the C key, there's the crop that I've made. I can either decide to make a change to it, or I can decide to hit the escape key and come at it completely differently. Now here I've opened up another of my Eagle pictures. This one again is uncropped, but I've opened it up into Photoshop. The crop tool is 5 tools down from the top, but once again the same shortcut. We'll select it and I've just touched the C key, but we do have quite a few options here. I'm going to click and hold and say that of all of these we're going to only concentrate on this one, the crop tool. But we do need to say something about the options along the top of the screen, because many of them we're quite familiar with. I'm going to clear some old settings I've got here, because in this first drop down box, generally by default you're going to see width and height resolution. That's generally the setting we see. And once again we get to see the rule of thirds, but we can view the grid in a number of different ways. So in its basic guise, let me just come away from this for a moment. I'll select the move tool so we move away from the crop. So if I select my crop tool, in normal circumstances I can just click into the picture, the rule of thirds appears, I can now start to manipulate my image and decide exactly which parts I want. And here I think I will try to give the bird a bit of an upward angle. I'd like to, have you noticed that as I've come down here to give the bird a stronger position in the picture, I can now break the edge of the image. Now we want to avoid doing that if we can, but there are times when it's quite reasonable to do just that. But we'll come back and look at that a little later. Let's assume here, or let's keep things a little more simple here, but you can see I've added a turn. I'm making the bird a little bit bigger in the frame here, and I can hit the tick on the options bar to commit that change. But of course, as we move forward with the manipulation, the only way I've got to go back with that crop tool is via my undo keys. Now let me do that just for a moment so we can look at one or two of the other options along the top. So I'll go back to my undo history and I'll go back to the image I've just opened. I'll hit Ctrl 0 to fit the image on screen. We have another series of options here. One of those allows us to crop an image to a specific size. Now I think we looked at this when we looked at creating an image for a Camera Club competition perhaps, and we could put the values in here. So if I wanted to enter this into my Camera Club and I wanted to make this 16:9, I could put 1920 into that box in pixels, not forgetting that of course, and I could put 1080 into that box. There's my 16:9 crop. Although I've got a center toggle here, when I drag it down of course I still cannot change the aspect ratio of 16:9. So I get all the same options that I've had before, but we are going to retain that 16:9 aspect ratio. And once again, once I hit the enter key or the tick on the options bar, we commit that, and the only way back is with the undo history. But of course if you save a series of projects you could always go back in that manner. Now if we have placed values in the boxes along the options at the top of the screen and we want to change them, we can overtype them. If we want to remove them, we can just hit the clear button. We can also change the format from landscape to portrait just by clicking these two arrows, but it's not entirely appropriate with 16:9. Probably looks more attractive in 3:2 format, but I'll bring it back and I'll touch the clear button to remove the crop. The next option we have is to be able to straighten the horizons or straighten our images. I think we'll come back to this at some time later. What I'd like to draw your attention to next is the different ways we can look at composition rules. In this drop down box we have a number of them. We've currently got the rule of thirds. We have a grid, which maybe we could argue is not going to help from a compositional point of view, but I'm certain it would help for the layout of many images. But the others are compositional rules. We have diagonal, we have triangle, we have golden ratio, and we also have the golden spiral. If it helps, you can scroll through these using the O key on the keyboard. So there I've just skipped back to the first one and we can just rattle through all of them with a touch of the O key. But I think the rule of thirds is one which we'll use quite a bit. Now, although I've removed that 16:9 aspect ratio, you can see the shape is still there, but of course I do have the opportunity to return it to its full 3:2 if I need to. At the top of the screen in the options bar we do have a box which at the moment is ticked, and it says delete cropped pixels. Now that's the setting I usually work with, hence the fact that it's currently ticked. I think I'm right in saying that by default it's unticked. Let me just demonstrate the difference. I need to remove my crop for a moment so I can remove that tick. I want to crop my bird pretty quickly. I could drag in the edge and the top and the right and the bottom, but I can do it a little quicker with a click and drag. And I'm going to hit the tick in the options bar to commit that change. And once I've done that, I'm going to pick up my move tool. If I click into the picture and move it, you can see that none of the pixels of the image have actually been cropped at all. In fact, I can find a position where the bird isn't even being seen. It's like I've cropped the canvas that the image or the picture is sitting on, but not the picture itself, so I'm sort of looking through a letterbox. Now, I've never found a great need for this personally, but you might. But let me return this back to the original. I'll use my undo history to do that. So I need to go back to that point. I'm going to pick up my crop tool once again. This time I'm going to tick the box as I usually have it and do a very similar crop. I'll use the enter key to commit the crop this time. Generally a little more convenient, I think. But then with the move tool, when I go to move the image, you can quite clearly see that on this occasion the pixels are cropped away. We don't have them there. Up in the options bar at the top of the screen we do have another little box which is called ContentAware. When we tick this box we can apply what is called ContentAware Crop. But I'd like to come back and look at this in conjunction with some other content-aware tools. They're pretty powerful, they're pretty useful, and they're practical tools we're going to use. So let's save this content-aware crop and we'll look at that with the other content-aware tools a little bit later. We also have some options within this little cog here. We can click and hold and we get a number of them drop down, but I'm going to suggest you can safely ignore those. By all means go back in and take a look sometime in the future, but if you don't go in here for some time, it's not going to impact on the work you're doing. Now what I'd like to do next is to quickly return the values we used a little while ago. 1920 pixels by 1080. I'm going to crop my image. I'm going to give it a little bit of rotation so the bird has a nice upward angle. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to hit the enter key to commit that change, and then Control 0 to fit the image on screen. Now what we have up here with these values is something we're probably going to need to use again. Now we can create a preset of these values and any others that we think may be useful, and there's a couple of ways we can do it. If we go to the drop down window here, not only have we got all of those aspect ratios we saw in Camera Raw, 1:1, 5:4, 7:5, 3:2 and 16:9, we have one or two others as well, but we also have the opportunity down here to create a new crop preset. There's the label Photoshop's given this. That should tell us straight away exactly what it does, so I'm quite happy to live with that and click OK. I can also store them in a slightly different way. Let me just come away from that crop for a moment. In the far left of the toolbox, click the little arrow, go to the little cog and choose New Tool Preset. And once again, we get the opportunity to just select the title that it's given us, or we can adjust it. I usually make it a bit simpler. And click OK, and it'll appear down the bottom here. If I can just drag that down a little bit. Oh, it's put it at the top. That's going to be quite convenient. So what we need to do now is perhaps open up another image and simulate the fact that we're going to come back and do some cropping another day. And we've long since cleared all of the values at the top of the screen. So we're opening up Photoshop on another day with another image. This is a 3:2 aspect ratio image. It's not been cropped in Camera Raw or Photoshop before. So if I select my crop tool and I want those values back, I can do one of two things. I can go to the preset here and select it, and it'll appear along the top, or, and I'll remove it, I can just go to the drop down box here. There's my preset. I can click inside, I can move it to the location that I think is appropriate. I can hit the enter key to commit it, Control 0 to fit the image on screen. And there we have our presets ready and waiting for us at any time we need them. So cropping in Adobe Camera Raw or Photoshop, what do we choose? Well, I've given you a couple of ideas on why that may be, but to be honest, it's going to be a personal view, isn't it? Whatever suits the individual most.